And joining us now is Michael Mann, Distinguished Professor of Atmospheric Science at Penn State, with joint appointments in the Department of Geosciences and the Earth and Environmental Systems Institute. He has received many honors and awards, including the National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration's Outstanding Publication Award, selections by the Scientific American as one of the 50 leading visionaries in science and technology, and along with other IPCC authors, he was awarded the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. And in 2020, he was elected to the U.S. National Academies of Sciences, and his latest book is The New Climate War, The Fight to Take Back Our Planet. Welcome to Background Briefing, Michael Mann.
Thanks, Ian. I would say it's good to be with you, but it's a terrible day for anybody who cares about our planet, really.
Well, yes, and in fact, what happened today with the Supreme Court ruling in West Virginia versus the EPA, it's the fight to destroy our planet, isn't it?
It is. What we've seen is this Supreme Court, this truly reactionary Supreme Court, has essentially taken away a series of fundamental rights, the fundamental right to privacy, the right to safety in the face of gun violence, and now the ultimate right of all, the right to a livable planet. And
indeed, they've also made it pretty clear that with this doctrine that they talk about, the major questions doctrine, they really want to take the country back to the early era of FDR when the Supreme Court was enacting the non-delegation doctrine, which is where this new doctrine that Gorsuch and this ultra-conservative Supreme Court is operating on, which will strip the government of any ability to regulate anything. So they've already gone after OSHA and the and the CDC, and now they've gone after the EPA. So that seems to be a big part of this decision, isn't it?
It is essentially undermining the federal government's ability, the executive branch's ability to enforce the laws of this nation. In this case, laws to protect the people, to protect our environment. And, to me, it almost speaks to this is a constitutional crisis in a sense, because it's really this reactionary Supreme Court, the legislative branch, trying to seize the authority that is granted to judicial branch to enforce the laws of the nation.
So what can we do? We've taken several body blows over the last few days from the Supreme Court. This one is the worst for our children and grandchildren, and the last thing we need is to be paralyzed. So how do we bounce back, Michael?
Well, there's several things. First of all, we need the executive branch to assert its authority, and there's still a lot that the Biden administration can do to enforce the environmental laws that are on the books. So we need, the executive branch not to retreat from this battle. Secondly, we need Congress to pass climate legislation, meaningful climate legislation, whether it's through reconciliation or any other process. We need legislation that will allow the United States to make good on its commitment to the rest of the world, to lower its carbon emissions. We're the world's largest carbon polluter historically. And if we are not meeting our obligations, there's no way that other countries are going to be willing to meet theirs. All of this means that we have to turn out in droves. Those of us who care about these fundamental rights, who care about a livable planet, have to turn out in droves in this midterm election and vote for politicians who will work on our behalf, who will work on behalf of us and the planet that we occupy and want to leave to our children and grandchildren, and vote out politicians, the Republican Party, which has been a rubber stamp for this series of efforts, once again, to take away fundamental rights and to not advance legislation that serves the public good.
So in the dissent, which was written by Justice Elena Kagan and joined by Justices Sotomayor and Stephen Breyer, and of course Stephen Breyer stepped down today, and Ketanji Brown Jackson was sworn into the Supreme Court. She wrote in her dissent, Elena Kagan, "Today, the court strips the EPA of the power Congress gave it to respond to the most pressing environmental challenge of our time. Whatever else this court may know about it, it does not have a clue about how to address climate change. Yet, the court today prevents congressionally authorized agency action to curb power plants' carbon dioxide emissions. The court appoints itself, instead of Congress or the expert community, the decision maker on climate policy. I cannot think of many things more frightening.
So that's right, Ian. And,
that summed it up.
Yeah, I mean, Republicans have always railed against judicial activism. Right, conservatives have accused Democrats and progressives of engaging in judicial activism when trying to defend basic rights. But these are the most fundamental acts of judicial activism that we have ever seen. Literally taking away rights that existed on the books for half a century, to protect women, to protect children from gun violence, and to protect, of course, our planet from environmental destruction through carbon pollution. And so this, in my view, is, a judicial branch that is overstepping their role in the checks and balances that are in place in this nation. And again, the executive branch needs to push back and do everything they can here to enforce the laws that are on the books. And we need to turn out and vote for politicians who will act on our behalf rather than be a rubber stamp for polluters.
And again, I'm speaking with Michael Mann, Distinguished Professor of Atmospheric Science at Penn State, with joint appointments in the Department of Geosciences and the Earth and Environmental Systems Institute. He contributed with other IPCC authors to the award of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize, and in 2020 was elected to the United States National Academy of Sciences. And his latest book is The New Climate War, The Fight to Take Back Our Planet. I was just reading, Michael Mann, an article at The Intercept, how Charles Koch purchased the Supreme Court's EPA decision. And I must say it makes a very cogent and well-documented argument that this is a huge victory for Charles Koch. This is something he's been at for decades. He has a long view, and that in effect the case itself can be tied directly to Charles Koch. The challenges are 27 Republican attorneys general who were supported by the Koch-funded Republican Attorneys General Association. At least 5 Koch-funded entities have filed amicus briefs in this case. The Cato Institute, which was co-founded by Charles Koch, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the New Civil Liberties Alliance, and the Landmark Legal Foundation, and Americans for Prosperity. So the governor of California is saying this is a victory for the fossil fuel industries. How much is it a victory for Charles Koch?
Yeah, well, those two things are indistinguishable in a sense. What most people don't realize is, aside from being, dark money funders of, a right-wing agenda in general, the Koch brothers, or I should say Koch brother, because there's just one of the two of them left now, David Koch, are also the largest privately held fossil fuel interest. Much of their money is invested in fossil fuel refining and extraction and products, pipelines and products that are based on fossil fuels. And so, this is in their self-interest, of course, and it is in the self-interest of the polluters, ExxonMobil and other fossil fuel companies who have funded many of these same organizations, these outfits, these think tanks that have been working for decades to overturn these fundamental rights that we're seeing overturned, and this just being the latest of them. And so, again, it points at basic challenges right now to our democracy and to democratic governance, and the importance of taking back our government in this next election is maybe our last opportunity to do that.
So, I mean, as I mentioned, Michael, these body blows have been happening thick and fast, with women's reproductive rights being taken away, the ability for blue states to have gun safety laws.
Yeah.
I mean, just imagine If that law that the Supreme Court handed down the day before they handed down their other decision on Roe v. Wade and Casey, imagine what would have happened on January the 6th had that law been in place. A lot of those people that stormed the Capitol would have had assault rifles. There would have been unbelievable bloodshed. You wonder, what planet are they on? Does that?
Well, and some of them did. There were AK-47s that were seen during that attack.
But
on the
almost everybody would have
rifles.
had one, though.
Well, that's exactly right. That's exactly, and that's clearly what our president wanted, based on the latest revelations from the January 6th hearings. Again, this is almost a logical extension of the assault on basic rights and basic protections we've seen over the last several weeks. It was almost expected that we would see, once again, now, the in a sense, revocation of the greatest of all rights that we have, the right to a livable planet, through this decision, because as you alluded to, Ian, this is really sort of a wedge that the court is putting in there so that they can begin to undermine the ability of the federal government to really enforce any regulations against air and water pollution. This is just the first of what we can expect will be additional decisions of this sort. There's one last remedy, of course, if Democrats can gain a larger majority in Congress in the midterm elections. There may be the possibility of filibuster reform, and as well, the president has to consider the possibility of expanding this court.
Well, I was going to say that these body blows are becoming thick and fast. After the gun decision, there were massive demonstrations around the country, and likewise with the striking down women's reproductive rights. So we can't keep marching for different causes. We've all got to get together now and realize that there's sort of one cause that we all have to sort of join in against, and that is this reactionary Supreme Court and these rulings to take away the ability to have a livable planet for our children and grandchildren, so that they can go to school and not be shot. And
that's right.
So that if when the girls are teenagers, they get pregnant, they have reproductive services. So, as I say, I'm not saying people shouldn't.
Democracy.
But I'm not saying people shouldn't march, Michael. I'm just saying that we got to come up with a unified strategy here, don't we?
That's right. And frankly, progressives, Democrats need to get more aggressive, because the other side has always been willing to make use of any angle that they have and to overstep the bounds at every turn. Here, Democrats have to consider what mechanisms exist within the legal framework of our government to stop this madness. And one of the most important mechanisms that exists is to undo the vandalism that was done to our Supreme Court by Donald Trump and expand that court so that it is more representative of the people of this country. That is something now that, in my view, is essential, because otherwise there's no way we can stop this onslaught of destruction that is being done by this reactionary activist Supreme Court.
So just in the last couple of minutes then, Michael Mann, just returning to your expertise in terms of atmospheric science, and every time there's an IPCC report, it's just more alarming than the last one. So we have a very narrow window to deal with global warming before it's too late, and you have this sort of reinforcing feedback loop that makes it almost impossible to stop the planet from overheating. Where do we stand there in terms of the ticking clock?
Yeah, I mean, so the good news, if there's some good news there, is that we're there's no reason to believe that we are, at this point yet committed to warming and changes in the climate that will be self-sustaining, that will trigger these sort of hothouse feedback loops that some scientists talk about, these sort of tipping points that make the warming self-sustaining. The best science, the best available science tells us that if we bring our carbon emissions to zero within the next 2 decades, we bring them down by 50% in this decade. It's a monumental task. But if we can do that, then we can keep warming below 1.5 Celsius, 3 degrees Fahrenheit, and that will prevent the worst consequences of climate change. So the good news is there is still time to act to prevent further warming and further damage associated with that warming. But that window is short. And again, if the United States is not taking a leadership position here, then it's difficult to see other countries like China and India doing their part. And we all have to do our part. We all have to work together if we are going to cut those carbon emissions in half within the next 10 years, which is what we need to do. And so this Supreme Court decision is, another body blow when it comes to our effort as a nation to meet our obligations and for the administration to meet its obligations to the rest of the world, the commitments that we, the United States, have made to the rest of the world when the Supreme Court is doing everything it can to handicap us. We have to fight back using every means at our disposal.
Well, Michael Mann, I thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Ian.
And I've been speaking with Michael Mann, Distinguished Professor of Atmospheric Science at Penn State with joint appointments in the Department of Geosciences and the Earth and Environmental Systems Institute. He contributed with other IPCC authors to the award of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize, and in 2020 was elected to the United States National Academy of Sciences. And his latest book is The New Climate War, The Fight to Take Back